Welcome to our third and last module for the online training. This module, this PowerPoint, is all about healthy boundaries. What's ahead in this PowerPoint? We'll look at some guiding principles and then a few definitions of boundaries, and we'll definitely investigate public versus private, which is probably one of the most important things when we're teaching children and youth about healthy boundaries. So to start with, I'd like us to consider some guiding principles, and albeit from 1996, a little bit old, this came from the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Children with Disabilities, and although it refers to children and young adults on the autism spectrum, I would like it to consider this for all of the children that we care for with intellectual disabilities. And what that committee recommended was that children and young adults should know the names or the names for referring to their genitalia, have some concept of privacy, their own and of others, know which things not to do in public that are acceptable in private, know that no one else is allowed to touch their private parts except for a specific reason, and know whom you can kiss, hug, and whom you greet in some other way. So what the previous slide was describing is healthy boundaries. And what we know is that children and youth who understand healthy boundaries are more likely to develop skills for self-control and individual responsibility. And then they're able to show respect for others, and most importantly, they can develop some personal safety rules. And really what we're trying to create are communities where everyone feels that they deserve respect and they get to feel safe. And what we find is that parents are often more concerned about the risks of abuse when their children and their youth have disabilities. And research suggests that youth with disabilities, both physical and intellectual, are more likely to be abused and exploited. So we do have to acknowledge that. There is definitely a concern, and it is documented, and it is normal to feel that. However, the good news is that when we talk and teach about healthy touch and boundaries, we can reduce this risk considerably. So our first piece of teaching around healthy boundaries is to establish an understanding of what is public versus what is private. And we could have a very long discussion about this because I think some people get quite confused. But public means more than one person. It's something that can be shared with other people. And that actually can include things like information. Oftentimes people believe that putting information into the computer is private, but in fact, when you consider it's the World Wide Web, we can access that material, and many people can access that material. A very practical activity that you can do with youth, children and youth, either at home or if they're at school or in a program, is to identify where some of the public places are that they visit. Make it very specific. And you can see here, I've simply used clip art pictures. And so you can draw those from the internet. A really great little activity you could do with a child or with youth is to go around with a camera and actually take photographs of all the places in their lives that are considered public. So in this instance, we have the family room at home, we have the swimming pool or the rec centre, we have the public library, and finally we have public washrooms. And on the flip side of public, we have private, which means not for sharing, such as keeping personal details private or private body parts covered. Just going back to the social media piece and the internet and using computers, teaching children and youth about password protection, about being able to know when they can share personal details, because many of our children and youth, even if they do have an intellectual disability, are using computers, they're using tablets, they're using telephones, smartphones, and so it's a big part of their lives. With private places, really the only two private places for all of us, and this is important to identify with your child or the children you care for, is the washroom at home, the bathroom at home. And what we do is we actually put a proviso there that the blinds are closed, the curtains are closed, and that the door is closed so that you can do private things in that private place. And the other place is if you have your own bedroom, is the bedroom at home when you, again, close the curtains or the blinds and close the door. If you click click on the link below from our website talking about sexuality in Canadian communities, it will take you to a section on the website to look at public versus private. And I'd like you to take a look at this section and then think about how would you use this with your child or youth. This is a really good activity. You can sit down in front of the computer or in front of the tablet and work through this together. Now, unfortunately, there are some exceptions to some of the rules about public and private, and this can make it a little bit difficult for children to understand. When we consider community helpers such as doctors, therapists, police officers and firefighters, when we're talking about some of those rules of touch, and if you think back to the previous activity where you looked at the public and the private, we're saying that people can only touch you to help you with personal care, and so this is when some of these people come into this. And so for example, a doctor giving you a checkup, maybe an occupational therapist working with a child, or a physiotherapist working with a child. And so I always emphasize to children and youth that, when you're in those situations, chances are most of the time you're going to have mum, dad, auntie, grandma, someone with you, an adult that you trust with you while that's happening. And although these people are strangers, they may need to know some personal information about you. So they might ask you your address, they might ask you name and those kinds of things, and they will probably need to come into your personal space. And these touches might seem scary or hurtful. So it's always curious as I go into schools, and because I have my Alberta Health Services tag on, the kids always think they're going to get shots because they always think I'm the nurse coming to give them shots, and then when I tell them, they're very relieved. But things like giving a needle, they might be hurtful or scary, but you need them to keep healthy. So the first discussion question for this module describes some of the challenges, issues, concerns about boundaries and safety that you think children and youth with intellectual disabilities may experience. So this may come from your own experience, and I will remind you around confidentiality. It may come from a story that you've read, something you've read on a blog, online, or in a magazine article, just something that's going to help us think about how can we do some teaching around this, and if you have not just the challenges but the solutions, add that too.